Overview of how to do your project paper. So follow the rubric. I guess you're getting that idea by now. It's on page 8 of the syllabus. When you write your paper, try to use headers that are very similar to the ones listed in the rubric. This is going to help you organize your thinking. It's also going to help your teacher grade your paper. It's really hard to grade a paper accurately when you're looking through the paper to see if the student has accomplished all of the objectives. If you organize it just like the rubric, I guarantee you're going to get a higher score. So the first section of the paper might have a header like definition of project, project introduction, project definition, goals, and timeline. In that first section, make sure you cover each of the bullet points that are listed in that rubric. We want you to give a concise description, definition of your project, state the agency that you're working at or your workplace, give some details about that agency, where it's located, what its mission is. It doesn't say this in the rubric, but I would hope that you describe the population you're working with. Is it senior citizens? Is it a certain socioeconomic demographic? Is there a certain linguistic group, etc.? State your goals and objectives, just like we worked on in Blackboard. Make sure you have a timeline for your project. This timeline can be brief, just bullet points by date. I'm going to give you a quick example here on the next slide. Here we're using the example of the hand washing project. Of course, this is just the beginning. I'd like, I don't know, 10, a dozen different project tasks broken down at least to that level of granularity. You can actually even use the number of hours you anticipate on each date. So for the second section, the rationale for the project, let me digress here just a moment. When you look at the rubric, you will see that each section has a point value assigned. It does not take a rocket scientist to see that you are going to put more effort into the sections that have the most points. That said, in this section, use again a clear header so we know what you're talking about. Your topic header might be rationale for the project, reason for the project. Don't use the first person here, but tell us why you are doing the project. You're going to write in the third person because this is a scientific, a scholarly paper. So again, using the subject of hand washing, why are you doing this? Hopefully there's kind of a greater reason than, yes, you're teaching the children to wash their hands at the preschool, but hopefully the reason isn't just to keep finger paint off the cabinets. Hopefully there's a greater reason, which might be to prevent the spread of diarrheal disease. So you get the idea. Usually there's a reason you're doing the project. Sometimes it's just this topic really interests you and you wanted to learn more about it, but I want to see the reason. So rationale continued. What are the benefits of this project? So going back to this example of the preschool hand washing project, benefits: children will learn in a fun educational setting how to prevent the spread of disease. That's one benefit. You can think of others, I'm sure. What are some problems you anticipate? Now, I venture to say that no project is problem-free, so this is your chance to think about what kind of problems, what kind of roadblocks you're going to meet up with. Problems can be time-related. Problems can be you're concerned you're not going to have people show up for your teaching session. You're concerned they're not going to see the handouts you put in the break room, that they're going to end up getting used as placemats on the break room table. I don't know. I mean, take it seriously, but there will be problems, and this is our chance to kind of hash them out. So your third section, resources, budget, take some time here. This is where you're planning things to really break out what kind of resources you are going to require. I think for most of these projects, the biggest resource is your personal time. You can actually look at how much you're making an hour and multiply it out, or you can just give a breakdown of hours. If you're using other people to help you with your project, you want to include their time too. If you're spending any money, you want to break down what the money is going for. Maybe you're buying poster board, maybe you're having things copied. Last year, there were some students who actually had some budget allocated to them by their managers at work. So, of course, those were very specific monetary allocations. So anyway, be specific again. Use a table like I showed you in the other slide, or bullet points, something, so we know what you're doing here. The fourth section, applicable theory and research. This is, of course, where you're going to discuss the theory and research your project's based on. The rubric is not specific about the number of resources. For the papers in my class, I'd like to at least see 2, but I would think that would be a starting point. For the papers in my class, at least, I would like a references section at the back of your paper with APA formatted citations. If you're using internet resources, I'd like a link that I can follow to find the resource. You don't need to make PDFs or copies of your materials, but good citations so I can find them. So where do you go for research references? By now you know the answer to this. You're almost at the end of your BSN program. But just to remind you, CSU East Bay has a librarian just dedicated to nursing. Here is the link to her contact information. She's there to help you. Actually, any of the reference librarians at the university are very helpful. For those of you doing practice improvement projects, and really most of these are practice improvement projects, one of my favorite places to start is the AHRQ. Here's the link to this. I've already sent a few of you some practice guidelines from the AHRQ, and we've talked about those. You don't always, the guidelines have sometimes a lot of different guidelines in them, a lot of different points. Sometimes your projects are just going to focus on 2 or 3 of those points, but this is a starting place. PubMed is my favorite research database. As a student at the university, you have free access to it. You log in through the school library. And really, as a starting point, if you haven't used Google Scholar, I would say it is a great place to start. You can find articles and then go back to PubMed and actually read them. It's easy to use. It's accessible to anyone, anywhere. And section number 5 is evaluation criteria. Last year, a lot of students kind of overlooked this section, but it's very important. It's 20 points, a fifth of your paper. So how are you going to measure your success? We've talked about this a little bit on Blackboard. Think about tools you can use to measure your project's success. You can hand out a quiz. You can do a survey. SurveyMonkey is a great online tool if it's appropriate for what you're doing. You can collect verbal feedback. Write down what people say or have them, or you can have written feedback. But I want that presented maybe in a tabular format so I can see it. And I want you to take some time to analyze it. Objective criteria. Last year someone did a project on blood culture contamination. She was able to demonstrate with hard numbers that there was a drop in the contamination rate, and she reported those in her paper. So continuing on the topic of evaluation criteria, we have worked hard to create clear objectives for your project. So how will you know how each specific objective is being met? I'd like to see that discussed here in this paper. You have 3 objectives maybe. Talk about how you know each one of those has been met. The next item in the rubric is, how does this project fit in with any criteria that your workplace or agency provides? So some workplaces have specific protocols that you are working with. Some, in the example of the nursery school hand washing project, actually nursery schools are, if they're licensed, bound by state regulation, and they may have a set of written protocols on hand washing for the children. You can be very specific in that way. Or you may have to be more broad about how this is generally accepted practice, and you're encouraging that. Anyway, address that. Finally, don't forget to talk about how this project fits in with your own professional goals. So this can be very specific or it can be broader. If, for example, you're a surgical nurse and you're doing a project on malignant hyperthermia, this project is increasing your knowledge base and making you a better surgical nurse. If you want to be a pediatric nurse and you're volunteering at Children's Hospital, that volunteer opportunity is helping you gain access to the world of pediatric nursing. You get the idea. Finally, quality of the paper. This is kind of the package you wrap up this project and this paper in. And, presentation really affects how we perceive a project. So you want to follow APA format. You want to follow it very carefully. The OWL at Purdue, the online writing lab, is just a great go-to resource. The link I've given you here, if you look at that page, there's an example of a paper, so you can make sure that you're mimicking that format exactly. You can also search online to find templates that you can import into Microsoft Word, and then everything's set up for you. So be clear. You're going to be graded on clarity, which gets us to the topic of check for spelling and grammar, use spell check, use the grammar tools, have someone else read your paper and provide feedback. Since I've broken you up into groups, I would think, discuss it in your group, but you might want to have exchange papers back and forth between each other, and have your other group members read your paper and provide feedback that way. Or if you have a buddy in the program, you can do that. Anyway, you get the idea. It's really invaluable to gain clarity for your project, for your paper.